Okay. Let's see. Stop recording. Start. Okay. Let's see. Guess it works. Okay. Hi, everybody. Ooh. Yeah. Almost. Something like that. So I guess this is today and Monday is sort of a peak of the course, I guess. We're going to talk a lot about different technologies today and Monday then. But after Monday, well, after today also, the project is released. The sort of final coding assignment sort of will be released on Monday then. And then I guess it's all downhill. It's perhaps a lot of stuff you should code, should do the project. I think according to the schedule, more or less we'll sort of meet once a week, and I'll be available when you need my help. And then at the end of the course again, we'll meet a few times, both to sort of settle down the project, check all your assignments, and have some not too large written assignment, but still something. Okay. Questions before we start? Yeah?
By written assignment, you mean the exam?
Yeah.
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 Do you
written.
have old exams for us to look at?
I'll find out something that will make it easier for you to sort of study to it. I had the old exams that I had last year and the year before that. But since I think we are doing a lot of more laboratory work than they did previous years. So I think I'll make the written exam a bit more condensed, smaller, and then since I'm going to sit with you all somehow to check out how you worked with your assignments 1 to 9, those coding parts, I will sort of get a pretty good view if you sort of knows the stuff we did in the course. Yeah. So a bit tinier written part. Yeah. Well, that's the plan. Anything more before we move on? Okay. Before we start, let's play a game today. You imagine yourself as this is a company. So yeah, we are a company today, and we're going to make a large project. A lot of investments we're going to do, and we assume we're going to earn some money on it. So you all basically know your sort of fellow co-workers here. You have worked in different projects before. You know more or less your capabilities and the technologies you are aware of. So today is a big day, major day for our company then. So I am the president of the company and I'm sort of trying to start up this new technology shift in our company. So you all sitting here and you're sort of trying, okay, it will be me who will decide on this company's future by choosing what technology we will work with. So, okay. So you're really interested in what this CEO has to say. He's laying out the areas, but you will decide. Okay? So let's see. Let's review some technologies and try to figure out what would be the best technology for us to move on with. What will be the best for now? 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years. What should we do? What should we select? So just play a game. Just try to think of that. So it will most likely be what do you say? It's not. Give it a year or two, you might end up in that situation. So you will do decisions for the company on what to do with, what you should work with. So, and before lunch, I walked through PHP Frameworks and JavaScript Frameworks, and it's not really easy, but I still will try to sort of lay out the sort of world view on how it works. So let's see if we manage. And I stick with this slide for the PHP part first, I think. So basically, if we would go down the PHP part, so we could basically select frameworks or content management systems, and it really depends a bit on what we are going to do with them. So let's see what that is. And before we do that, do we really need a framework content management system? Can't we just do like we did last week? Or was it Monday? When we coded PHP, just pure vanilla. We hard-coded some pages. We created some views we included. We used PHP both as a sort of server-side language connecting to the database, and we used it as a templating language, creating the web pages. So we could basically separate them. So can't we just do it like that? Why would we need a fancy framework? Yeah. You know, the things we did this Monday then, it was hard code, small PHP work. It was basically building all the stuff from the ground up. From we had nothing. And then if you try to compare that with the view you got from Express.js, so we pulled in some really nice framework. We got a structure. We had routes. We didn't need. We got a lot of structure. Made it easier and more well, I'm doing a route. That's easy. How can I do a route in PHP vanilla? Yeah, I can do that. I could show you, but it's sort of a long way to actually build it up. So if we were to sort of actually compare the PHP way to the Expressway, Node.js Expressway, we really should put up a PHP relevant framework and compare them. So it's, what do you say? We're sort of comparing apples with pears when we are looking at the PHP stuff we did and the Node.js Express stuff we did before. So it's not really the same thing we looked at. So if we would move on with the PHP area, then we could sort of divide the frameworks we have in different areas. So we could look at pure frameworks. And these general framework, MVC frameworks, basically frameworks, yes. Let's see, we can see what they contain. Just code, pretty much compared to Express. We saw that part. We could use content management systems. Let's see what that is compared to framework. In PHP, which is open source, there is a lot of specific purpose content management systems. So if I'm going to do an e-commerce site, if I'm going to do a learning management system, and these sort of very more specific targets, I would sort of find a very specific content management system that would solve that. So I don't need to sort of build it all on my own. So let's see that. What we also have is something called flat file content management systems. And that is when you are building your website without having a database in it. You still want to be able sort of to make it easy for the user to create content. These flat file content management systems, they are usually, you are creating the content using Markdown. We know Markdown now. So we're writing all content in a sort of file structure, and the CMS is sort of generating this Markdown into HTML. And we also have some, we don't have a database here. So it's more static pages generated from Markdown. But still we have some way to sort of deal with data in those sort of content management systems. So that is a flavor of CMS without the database. That is very useful in in some cases. And another type of framework we could look at is sort of static site generators. And for those, we are creating the whole sort of website a bit offline. So, and offline we could create it with sort of PHP and routes and everything. But then we save website to HTML. So it will take all our sort of dynamic PHP pages and just write it down as HTML. And then we publish only HTML pages to the web server. So that type of websites perhaps is not very useful. You can't, well, it's a bit tricky if you want to do sort of log into it and let the user change and update things in it. But when you're only sort of showing more static content, that would be a very, very fast way of sort of publishing or running a website and secure. There's no way you can sort of get attacked when you're only using HTML and CSS on a static site like that. So there are several different type of sort of frameworks when we are. What are we going to select? Yeah, it depends a lot. So this content management systems, these are, let's see what would be the main thing with them. I would say they have a friendly user interface. So I install them very quickly, I download it, make it run, they connect to a database, and up pops this friendly user interface on the web browser. I can log in, and there I can configure the whole site. I configure what pages, the site structure. The whole structure is stored in the database, the tables, usually some relational database, MySQL or equal. And I can provide login for all company who's going to write content, blogs, articles, and they're gonna sit in the perhaps what you see is what you get editor, writing their content, saving to database, and showing off sort of the database or content of it. So a very friendly user interface, easy for people to work with. And yeah, you don't need to be a programmer to run, host, administrating a content management system. You can be a user. So if you are a programmer, you're not, well, we need to have some programmers when things turn out to be, fail, trouble. But you really don't need to be a programmer to work with this. So it has its pros. So what are the most popular content management systems in the PHP world? And a lot of things in the PHP world would be open source, so driven by open source development. I think the most popular would be WordPress. And it's being actually a blog tool, but there are so many things you can do with WordPress, so I would say it's a content management system. There's a lot of plugins, modules you can add to it, available out there. You don't need to be a programmer to run it, and that was actually when a few years back, I did a lot of websites for customers. I worked with a designer who designed the websites, and then she said, "Make it look like this, Michael." Yeah, so I made it look like that with a theme. Customizing it with some PHP, and the advantage with WordPress, it was a small site. It's usually available on all these hosting companies, and it has this very, very friendly user interface for the customers who was only sort of users and content providers. So it was very easy. It was basically this administration interface that was the main reason why we chose WordPress. Two other parts that is quite popular in the PHP community would be Joomla or Drupal, to have larger content management systems. And roughly we would just say, if you want to build a larger site, more pages, more dynamic stuff to the database, and perhaps you want to do a bit more customization, programming. You need a programmer here. Then you could go with sort of Drupal and Joomla. They are not frameworks, they are content management systems. They have a nice front end user interface. And I just put up the last thing there. It's PHP Graph. It's one example of the most popular flat file content management system. If you want to get rid of the database, you want to build your website using markdown content, that could be a sort of nice alternative to look into. And you build the same websites as more or less like the other ones there, but you don't get this sort of dynamic interface that I could log into my user interface, create a new post or page like I do in WordPress. So I need to do more steps to actually create content. GitHub would be a nice way to work with Graph, since we could sort of work with source content and generate the database, generate the website. So some popular CMS, and well, we are in PHP, and PHP, if we were to look at some sort of stats about what is used out there, some statistics would say that PHP is used at 80% of all the websites out there. I put in a few of those statistics, investigations in the reading material, and I think V3 Tech would say 80% of the websites out there is PHP. So, should we trust them? Yeah, we need to know how they actually are doing their investigations, but that is what they are saying. They're also saying that WordPress is the most popular CMS out there. But what we will find when we go into the world of PHP is that we have these more specific CMS. So if I'm going to run a forum, I will have to select from 3, 4, 5 different types of content management systems that are actually forum, and I can build a completely website with them. I can build pages and so on. But they are sort of focused on delivering the forum aspect. PHP would be the most used one. If we would do a e-commerce site, yeah, we could build it ourselves. We could build it from a framework. We could build it from Drupal, or we could pick one of the already sort of customized CMSs that are for e-commerce. Now, what did I have here? Magento, WooCommerce. I will get another list like 5, 6, 7 that has the whole sort of e-commerce market share when it comes to PHP, open source content management for e-commerce. Okay, yeah, just because we're using Canvas. Last I checked, I think Canvas was made in PHP. I think so, yeah. Moodle is at least. So, 2 different learning management systems, like we well know how they are working. So, again, a content management system, very specific tasks, deal with the sort of learning management system. And we would get another top 5 list that we will need to sort of select from if we were going into that area, delivering that type of products to customers. Okay. Behind all these content management systems, there are some kind of core. The core for the most of the content management systems, at least if we date a few years back, would be they hand-coded vanilla PHP, and eventually they turned out to write so much code so it looked like a CMS. But they build the core themselves. So then we have a lot of CMSs, and the core code, they look, well, different from each other. So no common concepts, no modularity, no modules we could sort of take in and replace. So then it comes to this framework type. This is, we build it from scratch, but not pure vanilla. We will do it the framework way. So we will take in, looking at the frameworks in the PHP community, they are more or less a bit standardized, I would say. They are more and more looking the same way. They are modular. They have the same type of basic modules. Well, they all need a bootstrap phase. They need to start up. They are doing more or less the same there. They have a router dealing with incoming requests and sort of having a callback for it. Compare it to what we did with Express. They are somehow enabling us to work with a MVC concept, model view controller. They have views. We have seen views both in Node.js and we talked about views in PHP, so they're separating it. They're working with the concept of controller. They're dividing classes into models. So they have a code structure. They have something called dependency injection. They have modules for dependency injection. It's sort of how is the design pattern, how you are structuring your application, how you're working with it, how each component is, or each module is sort of relying on the other one, how they are getting the service container containing all the framework services, how they're retrieving it. So it's a glue, sort of connecting all framework core modules. All of these frameworks usually have something of object relational mapping, ORM, and that is basically a set of classes that we use to connect to the database. And that is usually used sort of mapping this relational database into a object-oriented view. So we can work with classes, work in this object-oriented way, writing our PHP code for that sake then. And we don't have to deal with the SQL stuff. So it's an ORM would be another way to work with relational databases without knowing anything about SQL. So it has pros and cons, but it is a very popular way of sort of dealing with databases when you work with a framework. So, no, there is no user interface when we go into the framework world. They are plain vanilla code modules. We have to retrieve them ourselves with a package manager, so we are using Composer in the PHP framework or in the PHP area. We have a Composer downloading them. We need to set them up together. We need to sort of create a front controller where all the requests comes in. We need to load up the router. We need to add up service into the service container, and we need to build it from scratch. So there's a pro with that. Our company we would have total control of our code base. But then we need to have some really good programmers that actually sort of knows the complete backend there. And but we need to write more code. Okay, yeah. What would we choose? Some of the CMSs we talked about before, like Drupal, they are now more, they did take a few years back, they had the sort of whole internal architecture was handmade just for Drupal, only Drupal. But now they made sort of a larger design change. So a few years back, they moved on to build their whole sort of CMS using a Symfony framework. So they changed out their backend, the core of their CMS, and they are using one of the most popular frameworks out there now. So let's try to put up, perhaps not the four most popular frameworks, but at least the two ones in top. So if we will go into PHP framework area, we must have a look at Symfony. So that would be market leader for core components doing a framework. And it would look a bit like, it would look very much like Express. And so that could be comparable. Laravel is a very popular choice, and it builds on top of Symfony, but it provides some slightly different way to write the code. So it has another ORM, it has another template engine. It's always almost like you're sort of adding a syntactic sugar on top of Symfony. So writing code a bit different. So some programmers, they love the Laravel world. So use lesser code to write what they like, but it looks a bit different, and it maybe doesn't look always like PHP. But so Symfony or Laravel, two different flavors that we must review if we are going to this way. Then I just put up Falcon. That is a sort of performance-wise framework. They have built the whole framework, the whole PHP, it is a PHP framework, but they built it in C. So it's a C module. It's a bit rougher to install, but it's running in C, so they say it's a bit faster since we don't have this PHP code that needs to be parsed. It's just a C module. And then we can create our own pages through PHP. So we are using PHP, but the framework is implemented in C. So it's a nice thought. Maybe we should look into that if it's going to be really, really fast. At least this is a different idea of frameworks. And this yeah, let's just compare it to Symfony and Laravel. It's just another framework that is quite popular out there. So we could have a look at that also. Have you done MVC? Yeah? Okay. So then I go quickly through this. Then you know all about model view controller. In what context did you do it? Desktop application? Java desktop application. Yeah, okay. So then we know the basic stuffs about it. I would say the model is a bunch of classes. We could just say model classes, I do. We could put business logic or access data services in them. So that is actually our sort of application. That is the code we write to make things happen. I would say in the web context that the controller, I would like to have it thin, so I don't want to write a lot of code in the controller. It's an object oriented, it's a class, sort of an object. It's a controller class usually for me. I don't want to write a lot of code, but it's actually the single point where the core of the framework gets the request. It sends it to the controller, and here is my code. So I get the request. I talk to all the model classes I need with the aim to put together this data variable, $data in PHP, or just data in like we did in Express. So fill it up, and then I have a data, and this is what I want to be rendered as the response. JSON or web page, I don't care. So I send this data to be rendered then as a JSON view or an HTML view, and then I use the template language to actually render the page in its context. So I would say that we usually build it, make small code in the controllers. because it is sort of a glue between the framework, the models, and the views. So that is what actually makes things happen in this particular specific framework. I would say in the web context that the views we're doing, where we're creating the response, web pages, using our template language, just is rendering incoming variables. And I would propose that when we are in this view rendering area, we avoid doing requests back into the framework, or sort of do a request to the database, do a request to a sort of model class to retrieve additional information. I would say, no, we don't do that. We had the opportunity to do that in the controller. So let's do that there and have dumb views. They are not sort of intelligent. They are only to render the response based on the incoming data variable. So that is my interpretation of the MVC pattern and in web context. Well, web context, server side, I would say. And so write up a sort of a picture of it. Could look like this. So we got a request, we get a response. The request is coming to the controller after it has passed the sort of framework part, where the sort of bootstrapping phase, the router is involved, the router finds out, okay, go to that controller. So this is a controller class. Deals with the model, get the data, put the view out, rendering the response. This would be more or less, there are so many different sort of images out there when we're trying to representing how the MVC pattern looks like. So I would say that this is more or less, it is a tiny bit, it's a different flow in this image. So this would be, we having the controller manipulates the model and the model updates the view. So it provides a different flow in the application. So we would say, okay, it's MVC. Yeah, but it's different. And maybe if you did MVC and if you did a desktop application where you put up a graphical user interface, and so the user interacts with it, would be perhaps on top here. So user interacts with it, user event is sent to somewhere, controller supervising all the stuff, the controller sort of talks to the model, updates the state of the application, and something happens in the GUI. So that would be another flow. It's still MVC, but it's in another context. So then we can't find one common way of sort of show me one image on how MVC works. No, it's harder than that. It depends on what context, and there are many interpretations of it. But it's a very popular design pattern, an architectural design pattern. This one is also sort of MVC-ish. This is for, let's say, when you build applications on the client side, only on the client side. That would be a representation of how you're working with JavaScript to build a more desktop-ish application in the browser, where you're doing a lot of fetch. You're getting data from a REST API, you're getting it, and you're generating your pages locally in the web browser. And you are keeping an application state, sort of all the settings, all the current variables is sort of local in the web browser. So then this view model would be another interpretation of ish MVC pattern. It's not MVC, but it's sort of like ish. So then when we are to analyze select among all these CMS content management systems and frameworks, we will get a lot of sort of, yeah, we do MVC, but we do it like this, here, that. So it is a bit of a forest. How do they actually do it? Are they the same? Is it different? Does it matter? So it's a bit rough to get into that and actually know what's happening without being an expert on each part of it. I guess one reason why this MVC is sort of popular is it provides our company then to divide the work by competence. So do I need a model developer? Do I need a view developer? Where should I put it? I could sort of take my project and divide it into more or less MVC parts. If you want to be doing the controller, the glue stuff, you need to be able to talk to the user interface department out there doing sort of the views. And they are not programmers, perhaps they are only working in the template language. They don't know how to connect to the database. So we got this MVC. We could divide our projects in 3 different sort of parts, depending on your competence. So that is that could be a good way to deal with it. All these all these design pattern stuff, it also gives us a nice terminology when we are talking about these large code-based projects. Where should we put stuff? Yeah, we put it in the controller. No, it's too large. We have to split it. Put it in a model instead. It's a data module. It's pure business logic. Let's make a view of it. Let's render the JSON response in a view. Terminology makes it easier to sort of talk. And ending up this PHP part, let's just have a quick look on one framework there. Whoops. There. And let's quickly review a forum architecture. Okay. So this is just a sample. Could be any. It is a PHP framework. Looks a bit like Symfony and so. So we're just going to quickly review what is in it. So here are some pin repositories. There's more or less always a CLI, command line interface to these frameworks, where you can do stuff, you can scaffold code, auto-generate code by this sort of CLI, command line interface. There's always a router. There's some way to connect to the database, manipulate text and generate HTML from it. And then this is the complete framework. We have a part of an ORM. It's an active record. It's a design pattern, very often used in ORM stuff. We have navigation. We have database query builder. It's also an ORM. We have views. We have response. We have request. And all of these are sort of code modules. Each module has its own sort of source. It has its own unit testing area. So it has a lot of sort of, well, versioning handling, support area, unit testing, show off code quality. Well, that is code coverage of the unit test. Here is code quality from 1 to 10. Here is another 2 sort of benchmarks for measuring code quality. So this is each component or each module of the framework is sort of set up as its own small project, and then we sort of need to put them together. And if we are, let's see, how do we have I think a complete version of this framework, so it's still in the PHP area. Let's see its composers file. It's the equivalence to the package.json file. And we have, there we go. So we have, like these, a bunch of modules, all brought together to actually put up a whole framework. Last thing is, where did I put it? There we go. This is here. Let's just end by reviewing these 3 dots there. This is Florum. It's a PHP forum. It's brought together by 2 people. They were doing different projects before, and they were deciding a few years back that they were going to do a new forum software. So they call it Florum. They got together. One of them was aiming at the front end, and the other one was having the back end, and the back end was PHP from the beginning. So it's a rather new project, and they use new techniques still. It's a 3 years back, I think, 3, 4, when they actually started. So they ended up in doing the back end. So it's object-oriented PHP. They are doing this composer packages, where I just show you in the other frameworks, bring them all together. And they are doing it with Laravel. So Laravel framework builds on top of Symfony. So that could be it's a very well-educated answer on what type of backend I could choose when I'm doing a completely new project, but I'm doing it on my own. So they have a backend. They actually do a lot of REST stuff. So the backend is both delivering web pages, static, and at the same time providing a REST API. So it's more and more common that these backends we do need to do both, because that is the way. We don't only do static web pages in the browser, we're also having these dynamic fetching JavaScript applications in another way. So we need to do backend supporting both. And that is what they did. And finally, they have a front end. So how should they do their front end? And they decided to build it very much a dynamic, more look like a desktop application. So they did it with a single page application, SPA, so SPA technology. With a single page application, you could just compare it to Twitter or Facebook. They have JavaScript, a lot of JavaScript, and they are retrieving all the data from the server and getting the server, for example, as JSON, and then render it dynamically and at the client, and continuously sort of listening to the server. Did anything happen? Did anyone put a new post, forum post, new topic? Okay, I'm on that particular page. I should sort of display that to the user without the user needing to reload the page. So they opted for that type of single page application, and they were selected a React-like framework called Mithril for that. And after we have 15 minutes break, we will move on to the JavaScript world of frameworks. and let's see if we can find any trace of mithril in it. Okay? So 15 minutes, well, 15. We'll start 20 past.